Welcome back to the Malt Miller YouTube channel, homebrewers. In this video, Martin and I are diving into another one of our homebrewing 101 topics. Martin, what are we talking about today?
Fermentation temperature control. Is it worth the fuss?
Now, whilst the title of this video may come across as one of the most clickbaity ideas ever, actually it is one of the topics we get asked a huge amount about here at the Malt Miller, especially by people that are diving into homebrewing for the first time, isn't it, Martin?
Definitely, it's always there on the ticket, at least once a day. People asking, what is it, should I be doing it, and is it going to make a difference?
Well, in this video, we're going to dive into, ultimately, why we think that fermentation temperature control really is worth putting some effort into. Okay, so we're going to dive into the topics. We're going to talk a little bit about yeast and actually understanding what's going on inside your fermenter, and then we're going to talk about some of your options to control the fermentation temperature of your next batch of beer. Now let's kick things off by actually diving into a little bit about what's going on inside your fermenter after you've added your packet of yeast, after you've made your batch of beer. Now, it's actually a little bit of a miracle that's happening inside the fermenter, isn't it, Martin? It's one of those things that, for me, is probably the most interesting moment, because actually what we always say is that brewers make wort and yeast makes beer, right?
Correct.
So what's happening inside your fermenter is that sugary liquid that you've made on brew day, whether it's from a all grain recipe kit that you've brewed or an extract kit, where you've opened the tins or the sachets of malt extract, put it all into your fermenter. The minute you add the yeast, after a short period of time where it's kind of coming back to life, starts chewing down on the sugars that are in there and converting them into two things, right? Carbon dioxide being the first thing, and alcohol, right? And that's what then turns that really sweet, rich, malty liquid into the lovely beverage that we like to enjoy called beer. Now, there are some different yeast types that perform in different ways. Loosely speaking, Martin, what are some of the kind of different yeasts that we have available?
Look, getting about the kind of wild bugs and all of that side, let's just talk about lager yeast and ale yeast. Things that like two different temperatures and two different areas to ferment. One at the top, one at the bottom.
Yep. So you said one ferments at the top, one ferments at the bottom. Which is which?
Well, ale yeast is on the top. So if you want to harvest ale yeast, you crop from the top. Lager yeast, traditionally towards the bottom.
Yeah, so that's when you open up if you open up your fermenter and look inside it, you'll see that lovely foamy, frothy top on top of most ale yeasts. That's the Krausen, right? Which is really rich in yeast. There's loads of activity happening there. It's bubbling away because of all the CO2 that's being produced. Lagers, the yeast tends to sink to the bottom and do its job of fermentation there, right?
Correct, yeah.
And they like to perform at different temperatures. Now, the reason, I guess one of the distinctions between them is that lager yeast, when it's fermented really, really well, produces a really crisp, clean finish, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And you also need to think about, you're also going to want different quantities of those two different yeasts that you're going to be using in those two different temperatures.
Yeah, I mean, lager yeasts really need, at least double the amount if you're using a dry yeast, sometimes more.
Yeah, because it takes more yeast to do a job at a slower temperature because it is a slower job that they're performing.
Yeah, and then ale yeasts tend to produce, when they're in their optimum range, kind of, fruitier esters and flavours that show up in the finished beer that can really complement some of the other ingredients. English best bitters and ESBs, for example, really benefit from the lovely fruity yeast esters that can come from those traditional yeasts.
Yeah, and the simplest way to kind of understand all of this, read the packet. The labs have gone to a lot of work and effort to kind of tell you exactly how much to use and at what temperature to use it at.
Now, we've mentioned there the two different yeast sort of categories. There are others that sit outside that, some of the thermotolerant yeasts that love really, really warm temperatures, and there are the weird and wonderful bugs and bacteria that you've mentioned there. But in this video, we're really going to focus on, those two broad categories of lager and ale yeast, because those are ultimately the most used and the most popular. And if you're brewing your first batch of beer, they're probably some of the yeasts that you're going to be using. No, it's really important to remember, isn't it, Martin, that yeast is a living organism.
Yeah, you know, it's not just a dead product you just pick off the shelf, or an ingredient like sugar or
Yeah, it's not
malt.
magic, basically.
No, it's a living, breathing organism, and to do its job properly, to its best of its ability, it needs to have the best conditions. So it needs to be given the food it needs, the temperature it needs, and then it'll produce the best flavours possible.
Yeah, and if we venture into the realms where we're outside of those optimum conditions, right? It's like us. We don't always do the best work if we're outside of our most optimum conditions, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you were told that you needed to sit in the office and do a load of work and it was only 4 degrees in there, you'd probably be less efficient, wouldn't you? Less productive.
I'm certainly grumpy, I'll tell you that.
And it's exactly the same with yeast. Whilst it might not get grumpy, it will struggle to perform its job to the best of its ability. And that's why being in a position where you can control the temperature of your beer whilst it's fermenting and make that yeast happy, you're going to get better results. You know, you'll end up with a cleaner beer that doesn't have, you know, slightly off flavours, because certainly ale yeast, well, actually lager yeast and ale yeast, if you ferment them too warm, they're going to produce a lot of like undesirable flavours, maybe like fusel alcohol kind of flavours. You know, they're just going to be pushed to the point where they're really struggling. And if they're kept too cold, well, actually what can happen there is that they just stop fermenting altogether. The reproduction of the yeast cells stops, and you end up with a stalled fermentation. You end up with beer that hasn't fermented.
They go to sleep, basically.
Yeah, just like you. We've all got that recipe that we love to brew, right? You know, that one beer that we go back to time and time again to rebrew, whether it's of our own design or one of our all grain recipe kits that you absolutely love. It could be a beer kit that you really enjoy brewing. If you want to produce the same results time and time again, yes, there's things you need to take care of during the brewing process, mashing, water, all those kind of things. But from a fermentation perspective, being able to hold temperature with that yeast strain is actually really important to being able to brew the same batch, the same kind of experience time and time again.
Yeah, to be consistent and to be able to just drink the same thing all the time.
And if you're just relying on like the ambient temperature around you, which can fluctuate, well, regardless of if you've used all the same ingredients, the same yeast, if the temperature is fluctuating, you know, and you brewed it once in the spring and it was lovely, and then you brewed it again in the summer and actually it's much warmer ambient,
Yeast ain't going to like that.
no, and you'll end up with a different beer at the end.
I mean, ultimately, you're going to be stressing that yeast out, and any point of stress, it's just going to go, yeah, I don't like this, and it's going to burp out some nasty flavours.
Again, just like you. It's also worth noting that actually, if you want to brew really specific styles as well, you're going to want to use the yeasts that are appropriate for those styles, and making sure that you can fit the needs, the parameters of the yeast are going to be really important as you make that style of beer.
The other good thing, if you understand these flavours that you can achieve at certain temperatures, you know, the temperature where you want the consistent flavours that yeast is known for, you can then also start to play outside of those fields, just like we've done in some of our videos, you know, like we did the video with Burning Sky with Mark, where he was doing the saison slightly lower than what we would normally do it at.
Yeah.
You know, we've been to other breweries where they're also then playing on using those esters to create more impact. You know, even our Doom Bar kit recipe, you know, we ferment that at 26 degrees, so you get those esters.
Yeah.
So you can use those slightly different flavours to change the profile of the beer as well.
Well, and also if you've got fermentation temperature control, you are in the realm of being able to experiment with some of the thermotolerant yeast strains that need to be fermented at much higher temperatures that can produce some amazing results
In super quick time.
Yeah. Now that's our kind of top line overview of why we think fermentation temperature control is an important topic to understand. There's lots of other content out there, you know, some of the stuff we've touched on here, like playing outside those parameters, thermotolerant yeasts, all that kind of stuff. There's loads of content out there available, but if you've got questions specifically, drop them down in the comments section below. As with anything when you're starting homebrewing, all of the topics that there are to cover can feel a bit daunting, and also feel like maybe you need to spend lots of money to kind of get invested into that part of the hobby. Now, we want to talk about what some of the options are when it comes to fermentation temperature control. And like with everything that we've covered, especially our topic on water treatment, doing something is better than doing nothing. So we're going to explore kind of what your options are and how they can grow with you as you expand into the hobby. Come on then, Martin, how did you start doing fermentation temperature control when you started homebrewing?
You're going to love this. Now, I'm going back over 10 years. There wasn't as much content out there showing me what to do. There wasn't as many places to shop for more amazing products available. I was into keeping fish.
Oh, okay.
So I had a plastic bucket fermenter and a fish tank heater. What I did is I took the plastic fermenter, put it into a trug, put some water in it, put the fish tank heater in the water, kept it at a regular temperature.
Right, okay, so you weren't putting the fish tank heater into the beer.
I might have done that once and then I learnt that lesson. Do not do that at home. That creates all kinds of problems and potential infection.
I mean, things have moved on a little bit. Fish keeping's a great hobby. I keep fish, it's a great hobby. But actually, let's kind of keep our hobbies separate at this point.
I did, though, then move on from that. I realised, there was a homebrew shop near me. I got a heater belt. I've still got that heater belt now, and I still occasionally use it when I need to boost something up, or a wine kit that I'm doing or something like that. But there's so many little options like that, that to add heat into your fermenter at that stage.
I think a really good starting point if you're just getting into this is focus on heat, okay? Because if you've got a heat source such as a heat belt, a heat pad that the fermenter sits on top of, or one of the really nice low watt density heat belts from Kegland, we really like them because they're a really gentle heat that's sort of dispersed around the whole fermenter. Have one of those and a temperature controller such as an Inkbird or the Kegland temperature controller, because what you can then do is choose the coldest point in your house to keep your fermenter, maybe a garage, put the heat belt on it, plug it into the temperature controller. It will toggle the heat source on and off as required.
Now, I did then, once I got my heat belt, invest in, wasn't an Inkbird. They weren't around. I had to build my own temperature controller. I got a control unit and a box from the hardware store, built my own temperature controller that regulated and turned it on and off. And then after that, did exactly what you said, fermenting in the garage. It was a little bit cold, got a sleeping bag, put that over the top as well, just to kind of insulate it. Kind of like the trick we've shown here, putting the cardboard box over the fermenter just to protect it from the light. And again, keep it a little bit more insulated.
Yeah, because you've got a layer, right?
Yeah.
And that can make a difference. And the benefit of that is that you've actually already got a couple of bits of equipment then. So if you buy an Inkbird temperature controller, one of the plug and play ones, it's got both heating and cooling as an option on there. So the next step might be that you then source a fridge. A fridge, under-counter fridge or a larder fridge off of, one of the online marketplaces. You can pick them up relatively cheaply. You can then put the heat pad or heat belt in there. You can put your fermenter in there, put the temperature probe, taped onto the side of the fermenter with a bit of bubble wrap.
I got a great trick for that. I used to have I still do. I've got a little jar of sanitizer that the probe goes into, because then I'm getting a liquid temperature.
That will then give you the option of both toggling the heat, but then also the cooling. So if it's the middle of the summer and you need to have your beer being fermented at like a 20 degrees and your garage is at 25 degrees ambient temperature, the fridge will take care of that for you.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing I did when I took up that part of the hobby, doing temperature control. Got myself a tiny little fridge, fermenter fitted in it, built a little shelf to sit the fermenter on.
Out of ply?
Yeah, out of plywood, and job done. And that absolutely worked, and it worked for so long. And it was still working when I chose to retire it. But what you've got then is not only the ability to control temperature, both heat and cold, it opens up the door to being able to brew traditional lagers.
Yeah.
Because you need those much colder temperatures to be able to do that.
Yeah, you can hold that 12 degrees C beautifully for as long as you need to.
Yeah, and then it also gives you the ability to cold crush your beer. and cold crashing really offers some amazing benefits. It's not about yeast health or yeast being happy during the fermentation, but what it does is it just gives you the ability to cool everything down to 4 degrees, something like that. All of those particulates of yeast and hops that are floating around within your finished beer settle to the bottom, right? You get that clearer beer at the end before you package it.
Yeah.
Now I've got a couple of bonus tips on this one.
Is this like Jimbo's big bonus bonanza or something? Is there going to be a theme tune?
Maybe.
Okay.
Right, first off, if you have a plastic fermenter and you're interested in having a fermentation chamber with a temperature controller and a temperature probe, obviously, you can buy stainless steel thermal wells that you can fit maybe into the lid of the fermenter as well.
So all the way down into the core of the beer.
Yeah.
Nice.
So the temperature probe goes all the way down that thermal well. It's then inside the fermenting beer. You're getting a really accurate temperature reading, right? The other bonus tip that I've got for you is that when you do look to purchase a fermentation fridge, try and get one that's big enough, not only for the fermenter you've got at the moment, but maybe the fermenter you're thinking of getting in the future. So some of the sort of slimline under-counter fridges, you can get a plastic bucket in them.
But not the bubbler.
Yeah, not the bubbler, but you're maybe going to struggle if you want to maybe move to like one of our Malt Miller stainless steel conical fermenters, or one of the kind of Fermentor type pressure fermenters. So just consider what you might want to do next, because there's so many of those fridges available on the marketplaces that are out there that actually get one that's a little bit bigger than maybe you need immediately.
Yeah, a good trick is you could actually set up a search on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, to search in a certain mileage just for fridges being listed, and you can soon have your pick and choice of all the different fridges.
Absolutely. Now there is a slight kind of midpoint now, isn't there, or another way of doing this?
Yeah, it's more of a traditional way that people would make the step from actually having a fermenter. You can have a cool box, fill it with ice, and you can then transfer that through a coil in your fermenter. So if you've got something with a coil in, like our stainless steel fermenter or Fermentor, you could then just keep topping that up with ice and cool blocks. And then you just need a submersible pump to put into this cool ice water that's hooked up to your inkbird that triggers and pumps the cold liquid through the coil.
Yeah, so when it gets to the point where the inkbird goes, I need to turn on the cooling, it switches the pump on, pumps cold liquid through the chiller coil or jacketed tank if you've got a jacketed tank. Job done.
I mean, this is a lot more old school, and you used to kind of hear about this on the Brewing podcast. This was before glycol chillers were so easily accessible.
Yeah, and that really leads us on to the next one, which is the more, I guess, higher end of temperature control, where you get a little bit more in the way of automation, and you get the ability to hook up multiple fermenters at the same time, and also in some cases have them work via an app, and that's glycol chillers. So for anyone watching this that doesn't understand or know about what a glycol chiller is in our kind of home brewing hobby, Martin, what is it?
It's essentially what a professional brewery uses to control and maintain temperature cooling on their tanks in the brewery. And it's essentially a vessel which has got a big bath of glycol liquid, coils that go around it that chill it. So it's kind of like a fridge with a bath, and then it'll pump that out into the tank to maintain the temperature of the tank.
Yeah. So it's going to pump the liquid again once it's triggered to turn on.
Yeah.
It's going to pump that liquid into the chilling coil or jacket around your tank. That then acts as the cooling mechanism. And in many cases, like I said, these glycol chillers, you can hook, maybe 2 to 4 fermenters up to them.
Yeah, there's all different ones available now, of different sizes and different price points. And some of them you can actually buy a jacket you can wrap around any fermenter, so hook that up to a glycol chiller as well.
So a glycol chiller, really the big benefits of using a glycol chilled fermentation control system, the first one is you can have multiple fermentations happening at the same time.
Yeah, you can have 3 or 4 tanks hooked up to it. And the other thing is, it's about a third of the size of a fridge, and that's running 3 or 4 tanks.
Yeah, and they can all be set at different temperatures.
Yeah.
In many cases, the glycol chillers will also control the heating side of things for you. Some where the heaters are built into the fermenters that they connect to, like the Grainfather one.
Or you can just wire them in, like with the Ice Master.
Yeah. So that's then going to give you that kind of almost all-in-one solution. The thing I love about my Grainfather glycol chiller at home is that it is connected via the Grainfather app. So I can monitor and track my fermentation wherever I am. I can put the temperature up, I can put the temperature down. You know, basically I can log in wherever I am, see what's going on, see how my beer is fermenting, what temperature it's at.
There are other systems that do that as well, James.
Yeah, there are, Martin, and that leads us on nicely to something that actually we are planning to bring into the range in the next sort of 6 months or so, and it's the fermentation chambers from Kegland. These things are fantastic. We've got one here that we've been playing around with. Imagine what we've just talked about there with a fridge that does heating and cooling for you and has a temperature controller, but also has lots and lots of functionality around kind of app-based control and flexibility because of the size of it. You know, this system, you put the fermenter in, you don't hook a fermenter up to it. You can use things like the wrapped pill, the digital hydrometer, to connect to it, to actually track the fermentation of your beer as well. You can have profiles built into it so that when it hits this point in fermentation, raise the temperature or drop the temperature. You know, it's a really advanced bit of kit that for quite a lot of people is a different solution to having a glycol chiller, and I can understand why now, having used it a few times. But I guess we'll probably do some more content on that as and when we have them coming into the range, and we'll kind of get everybody up to speed on how they work.
I can't wait to see that because you've been raving about this thing after the last couple of times you've been using it. So yeah, I look forward to watching that.
So whilst fermentation temperature control might feel a little bit daunting if you're just starting out in the hobby, it's absolutely something you should consider looking at. And even if you do just the basic stuff that we've talked about at the beginning of the video, you're going to see a difference in the beer that you're producing.
James, for me, I kind of look back on, you know, when I started homebrewing, this was the one thing I think that kind of really took my homebrew to another level. I was able to produce consistent beer time after time, but also just lose a lot of those horrible off flavours that were appearing in some batches, and I couldn't explain. This just made the beer so much better. It's definitely worth taking some of those small steps, and you don't have to do them all at once. Do one or two at a time and kind of work your way up the ladder of fermentation temperature control.
I also think that if you're somebody that is brewing extract kits, this is absolutely applicable to you as well. This isn't just something that's exclusive to all grain brewers. Arguably, if you're an extract brewer that wants to advance in the hobby, before you start thinking about moving into all grain, focus on this.
It is exactly what I did.
Yeah.
You know, because I was buying these kits and I was thinking, why would a brewery package this up? Because this is what they were. They were like named as brewery beers. Why they do this? And why is the beer tasting so bad? And it was because I was just stressing that yeast out.
Yeah, and you can see significant leaps forward in the quality of your beer, regardless of method, by focusing on taking care of your yeast. It is the one thing that both of us, when we were talking about this in the run-up to filming this video, absolutely look back at as a waypoint in our journey as homebrewers that made a significant difference.
Now, if you're interested in building your own fermentation fridge at home, we've got a video that shows you just how to do that with a much younger looking me in it.
Yeah, it's still as handsome though, right?
Thanks, James.
Yeah, and also we'll put some links down in the description below for some of the bits and pieces we've talked about if you want to explore some of the products that we've mentioned. And if you've made it to the end of the video and you're not already subscribed, please do subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up because that really does help us out. As I said earlier as well, if you've got questions about fermentation temperature control or anything to do with fermentation, put them down in the comments section. We will absolutely get back to you. And as ever, have a great brew.